So you're Blues captain Ryan O'Reilly, and you want a haircut that's as custom as your stick curve. At Great Clips, we save your haircut details in clip notes, so you get your signature look every time. We got you, and you got this. Great Clips, official hair salon of the NHL.
Sekeres and Price from Wall Center presentation, Audi downtown Vancouver. And Jeff, we said we're going to play some of the Hank and Danny conference call from earlier today. You asked a very good question of them. Are they going up together or as individuals? Take a listen.
We haven't heard, but I'm guessing we'll have our own moments. That's my guess, and so we'll see what happens.
That was Daniel.
And I do think it's a fair question because that speech, that induction speech, is so often used to sort of track the history to get to that point. Absolutely. And to thank so many of the people that made it possible. Well, it's Daniel, it's Henrik.
So many of them will
be an awful lot of overlap. So this comes back to this idea of considering them one entity. I mean, this is their moment. But it'll be fascinating to sort of hear if they do each come up with their own speech, how much overlap and how, what was important to them. I guess we'll find out at some point in mid-November.
So I suspect they'd probably prefer to do it together. But if they are going up individually, I would suspect that one of them will take care of the thank yous for those along the way who helped the hockey journey. And the other will maybe take a different tact.
Well, I want to live in a world where one of them would speak first and then the other would come up and correct everything that the first one.
If I could set the record straight.
He doesn't know what he's talking about. This is how it actually happened. I'd love to see something like that. But, it'll just be interesting to see that process, too, of, the planning and everything that goes into coming up with those Hall of Fame speeches.
Well, as you outlined yesterday, Jeff, and as we heard from them yesterday, Daniel started with a 20-goal NHL rookie campaign, but it was several seasons of point totals in the 30s, a market that was up in arms about what was happening with the second and third overall picks and whether they were going to turn in to the players we all thought they would be. Here's Daniel on the patience that was required in nurturing the Sedins' careers.
I think patience is number one, especially with the early years with Berkey and Dave Nonis and Steve Tambourine and everyone that was around then. Like we didn't come in right away with I think the way fans and media expect us to come in, but they really truly believed in us, and they were pretty honest, I think, to the outside too, saying it was going to take a few years for us to get to where we need to be, and that gave us time. I think we didn't have to rush anything. We knew ourselves that was going to take 2 or 3 summers. I mean, it's tough to get to where we went to from where we were in one summer. That's really tough, but we took it year by year, and they gave us the patience, and that's something I think we took from coaches as well, both coaches and management. Where if you want to change something, it does going to happen right away, and the best coaches and managers are the ones that give you time and believe in you.
Completely possible I missed this, but that's the first time that I've heard them mention they knew at the time it would take 2 or 3 summers.
Yeah. I thought that was revealing.
Yeah, to become the players they hoped they would be.
It's also pretty remarkable, knowing what we know about his track record now, that Brian Burke was willing to show patience. I'm not sure patience is necessarily his biggest virtue.
He has said it a million times. I'm an impatient guy. I will die an impatient guy.
And yet,
look at the Phil Kessel trade in Toronto.
But he built that buffer that they just talked about there, that there weren't the expectations and that they were able to allow the Twins to grow ultimately into the players that they became.
Let me ask you this. Would they be given 4 to 5 seasons these days?
I don't think so.
In a capped world, you need more
when we
sooner.
See the way that this league churns coaches, and coaches don't get 3 years. Forget high prospects. I just think that it's all about the here and now, and if you don't show out the way that you were expected to, I just, like I saw the other day, Cody Glass got a new contract in Nashville now. It was Cody Glass and Elias Pettersson right down to the draft day, and the Canucks got that one right as well, obviously.
Yeah, they did.
But you've seen that a team like Vegas, there's a team that's not patient with anything, right? And so it's just this race to try to get it right and to make it right if you didn't get it right the first time. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to believe that second and third overall picks, second and third, Laine and Dubois, not that long ago, traded for each other to try to fix each other's messes. I think they were fortunate that the team was bad when they were drafted, and there weren't high expectations on them to come in and be the saviors right away. They were able to be that second layer behind the West Coast Express, and I think ultimately that sort of paved the way for them to learn on the job and become the stars that they are.
And you make a good point. It's not just patience on the part of the club; it's patience on the part of the player as well, right? You get on the phone with your agent. I need a new change of scenery. Get me out of here. Let's facilitate a trade. They were asked how they made each other better. Here's Hank.
I think it was every day in the gym, every day playing tennis when we were kids, every day competing. But mostly I think when we trained, and it's so easy to be happy with a session in the gym where you put in an hour and you walk away and you feel pretty good. But with Daniel there, like you always have to go the extra mile to push yourself. And those, you would think that those extra 2-3% doesn't mean much, but if you do it every day, it really means a lot.
Very intelligent answer.
Yeah.
Very revealing as well.
And we've heard that so many times from teammates and those around them, and TC Carling and Chris Brumwell and the PR department that just marveled at the competitive nature. And it makes sense. You're identical twins, right? Like, we know about sibling rivalries, and this is sort of that next level, but he even mentioned there tennis. But it didn't matter whatever the sport was, they wanted to beat each other. And I do think that makes sense the way that answer was laid out, that, if you go to the gym or I go to the gym and just put in the hour, you think you're done. But if you look over and your brother is still busted it and he's working hard and you think you're finished, then you're going to get right back there and try and pick up the pace. And so it does sort of feel like it was just day in, day out. And, I love that part of the answer too. You don't think that 2 or 3% matters? It does.
Yeah, it sure does. And the other thing I loved, and they talked about it yesterday, is just how they grew as people. And when Hank got the C, just how empowered that made him to talk a little more freely than he had previously. I know you and Andrew went through your favorite moments. On Rinkwide asked about the favorite Sedin moments. Well, for me, that Calgary goal, the tip pass between the legs, and then Daniel going between, and in part because it happened right in front of me there on the press. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Last game of the season, though, chasing the scoring title.
That's right. And to have that sort of panache and style, right? Obviously, the 1,000th point, and we're lucky enough to be at that game where he scores on Luongo for Henrik. We're lucky enough to be at their final home game in the overtime winner from Daniel. And then, the other thing that I'll forever remember about Hank is just how he had the presence of mind and the composure to not only come out and meet the media minutes after the devastating Game 7 loss, but you really, on the surface, would not have been able to tell that it was a Game 7 loss versus a regular season loss. Like, a lot of athletes don't have that in them. Hank came front and center, and like the first question from Jay Janower was about the riots going on outside, and he had the presence of mind to answer that with a good, thoughtful answer, saying, that's terrible. People should need to stop. We live in a beautiful city. Let's respect it. So, yeah, as I mentioned last week, I sure hope that they finally do get their respect and are first ballot Hall of Famers, and I think the Hall bestowed that on them.
Yeah,
and I was glad to see that.
The final home game will always stand the test of time. I mean, it was just such a magical moment. You couldn't have scripted it any better. And it was funny watching the highlights again yesterday. And I made note of this, I can't remember when, but the 3 Arizona Coyotes that are on the ice killing the penalty in overtime. And remember, it was a power play. OEL, Luke Schenn, and Brad Richardson, who all just finished the year here as Canucks. And it was Stanley Cup goaltender
Darcy Kemper. Very well done, yes.
For the out. So that moment, again, I was fortunate enough to be in Edmonton for the final game, to be in Nashville for Daniel's 1,000th point. That overtime, the marathon overtime win against Dallas in 2007, for Daniel to set up Henrik, a little reverse, but hey, it worked.
Crazy things happen that deep into overtime.
Exactly. So the shift, people have talked. There were just so many along the way, but you're right. Like from a personal standpoint, being on the job and in that room and having seen other teams and having seen other iterations of the Canucks, just to go in that room, loss after loss in the latter part of their careers and still just see the class and the dignity that Henrik understood. He's the captain.
I'm not sure did you ever see them with frustration boiling over?
No.
In an interpersonal setting?
I'm sure I asked some dumb questions. Others did that made me kind of cringe. Yeah. And they just stood in there and answered them like champs. And people have made this point, too, that they did that after the losses. But sometimes after the wins, they would take a back seat and make sure that the right guy was getting the attention on a given night.
I've told this story as well, but when I was back east working for the Ottawa Citizen, the Canucks were in town. They were practicing at the rink across the river where the Gatineau Olympiques play, or Alain Vigneault once coached, and a news editor came running out of the afternoon or morning news meeting going, "What's with these identical twins in the NHL?" And the sports department was like, "Well, they've been in the NHL for 5 years." Yeah, but aren't they doing better this year? And we're like, yeah, no, absolutely. They're really picking it up. Okay, we need a feature story. Rush on out there and get it. And went with a photographer to their practice. And Ian McIntyre was like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well, our news editor just discovered that there are identical twins in the NHL." And, sort of asked, what do you think they would do a picture for us? Like, which is really unusual, right? For visiting media for practice.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the twins came out like, "Yeah, sure, we'll put our jerseys back on and do the back-to-back, like the cheesiest, most cliched photo." And they were more than willing. And, from that moment forward, I knew, boy, these are pretty special, tolerant, patient, and accommodating people. So good on them. Class acts throughout their career.
I think, too, like when I look at their career and, painted with this brush of not tough enough, and it's just so much BS when you think of the way that they ascended to the top of the game and did it against, Adam Foote and Rob Blake and Chris Pronger when he played in the West. And
guys who could
Shea
mug
Weber
you, right?
And Brent Seabrook, and on it goes. Like they drew the toughest matchups and took a beating and still continued to have success. So this idea, of course they didn't drop the gloves and fight. That wasn't in their DNA. That's not who they were. But don't sit here and tell me they weren't tough. I just don't have the time or patience for that argument.
No, absolutely not. In an era where you could just mug offensive guys, particularly down low, particularly in the net front area, holding and hooking were a much different standard back then, Jeff, as you recall. And time and again, day after day, just fought through everything.